It was November 14th, 1967. The world was changing. The summer of love was giving way to a cold and uncertain fall. In Vietnam, the jungles were on fire. In the United States, the streets echoed with protests. But inside the soundproof walls of the NBC studios in Burbank, California, everything seemed under control. 15 million Americans were tuned into the Milton Cole Show. It was the temple of American entertainment, a place where harmless jokes were told, polite applause was given, and reality was scripted. But at 8:42 p.m., reality deviated from the script. A 350-pound professional wrestler named Boris, the Iron Bear, Petroff, did the unthinkable. He didn't just interrupt a guest. He laid his hands on a dragon. He grabbed Bruce Lee by the collar and lifted him off the ground. The host froze. The audience held its breath, collectively sucking the air out of the room. And somewhere in the darkened control room, a producer's hand trembled over the emergency stop button. What happened in the next 4 seconds would become the most controversial moment in talk show history. It was the collision of two worlds, the brute, unchanging force of the West versus the fluid, deadly philosophy of the East. It was so violent, so sudden, and so terrifying from a philosophical standpoint that the network not only cut the transmission, it erased the tape. It denied that it ever happened. But 15 million people saw it. And for those who witnessed it, the world was never the same again. To understand the explosion, you have to understand the fuse. And the fuse was lit several weeks before Bruce set foot on that stage. It was a Tuesday afternoon in Los Angeles, Chinatown. The air in Bruce's small office was thick with the smell of old paper and stale coffee. Bruce Lee was 27 years old. He was not yet a legend. He was not a superstar. He was a man with a hole in his shoe and a fire in his belly that was slowly consuming him. He paced the small room like a caged tiger. The walls were covered with photos, him training, sweating, teaching. Proof of a life devoted to the truth of combat. But the truth Bruce was learning didn't pay the rent. "I don't need publicity stunts, Ted," Bruce said in a high-pitched voice that pierced the humid air. "I need serious students. I need people who want to learn how to express themselves, not people who want to see a circus act." His manager, Ted, sat in a corner, wiping sweat from his forehead with a handkerchief. He looked tired. "Bruce, listen to me. You have 20 students. Some months you have 12. You can't eat philosophy. You can't pay the electric bill with integrity." Bruce stopped pacing. He looked out the window at the gray street below. He knew Ted was right. The Green Hornet had been canceled. Hollywood saw him as a sidekick, a stereotype. They wanted him to bow and scrape, to be the mystical Eastern man with the magic touch. They didn't see the artist. They didn't see the revolutionary who was dismantling 2,000 years of martial dogma. "The Milton Cole Show," Ted continued, his voice softer. 15 million viewers, Bruce. 15 million. You go on, you do 5 minutes. You smile, you break a board. You shake Milton's hand. Overnight, your school fills up. You could have 200 students. You could have your own studio. You could have everything you've worked for. Bruce looked at his hands. They were calloused hard. His tools. He hated the idea of selling his art for applause. He hated the idea of reducing Jeet Kune Do, the way of the intercepting fist, to a parlor trick for a bored suburban audience. But then he thought of Linda. His wife was at home, pregnant with their second child. The savings account was almost empty. The pressure weighed physically on his shoulders, heavier than any barbell he had ever lifted. A warrior can endure pain. A warrior can endure hunger. But a father cannot endure the suffering of his family. Bruce turned back to Ted. His eyes were dark, unreadable. "Okay," Bruce whispered. The word tasted like ash in his mouth. "One appearance. I demonstrate speed. I explain the philosophy, answer questions, and then I leave. No tricks, no circus acts." Ted exhaled, letting out a long sigh of relief. "That's perfect, Bruce. Milton will love you. You'll be charming. It'll be easy." "Who else is on the show?" asked Bruce, his intuition tingling. He had a sixth sense for danger, and it was on high alert. Ted hesitated, just a fraction of a second, a pause that lasted one heartbeat too long. "Who else?" repeated Bruce, his voice dropping an octave. They want to do a segment." Ted stammered, avoiding Bruce's intense gaze. "You know, a comparison. East meets West. Just a demonstration of different fighting styles. They hired a wrestler, a local guy. It's just for show, Bruce. Strictly choreographed." Bruce narrowed his eyes. "A wrestler? Big Boris. He's a character. It's entertainment, Bruce. Just entertainment." Bruce didn't smile. He walked over to the wall and straightened a photo of himself punching a heavy bag. If he hits me, Bruce said softly, it won't be entertainment anymore. Ted laughed nervously. He knows the rules. No one will get hurt. It's television. But when Bruce left his office that evening, in the fading light of Chinatown, he couldn't shake the feeling that he was walking straight into a trap. He didn't know that the producers of the Milton Cole Show weren't looking for a demonstration. They were looking for a massacre. They wanted to see if the little dragon could bleed. The day of the broadcast, November 14th, arrived with a heavy, stifling gray sky over Burbank. The NBC studio was buzzing with excitement. Cables snaked across the floor like black vipers. Men wearing headphones barked orders into the void. It was a factory of illusions designed to manufacture 60 minutes of happiness for a nation slowly losing its mind. Backstage, in a dressing room that smelled of hairspray and nervous sweat, Bruce Lee sat motionless. He wasn't warming up. He wasn't pacing. He was sitting on a folding metal chair, reading a book by Krishnamurti. To anyone passing by the open door, he looked small in the cavernous backstage area, surrounded by props and costumes. He seemed almost fragile, a relic from another era, out of place in this plastic world of modern television. But at the end of the hallway, in the star's dressing room, the atmosphere was very different. Boris, the Iron Bear, Petroff was putting on a show even before the cameras started rolling. He was an imposing man, sculpted from massive muscles and Soviet granite. 350 pounds of theatrical aggression. He yelled at a makeup artist, his voice echoing off the linoleum walls. More oil, Boris roared, flexing a bicep thicker than Bruce's thigh.
Make it shine!
I want them to see the steel. Standing in the shadow of Boris's dressing room door was Frank Miller, the show's executive producer. Miller was a man who measured the value of a human soul by Nielsen ratings. He took a drag on his cigarette, watching the Russian giant strut in front of the mirror. You know the plan, Boris, Miller said in a voice as gravelly as sandpaper rubbing against glass. The little guy is an actor. He's from Hollywood. He thinks he knows how to fight because he kicks high in movies. We're going to show America the difference between a movie star and a monster. Boris burst out with a deep, guttural laugh. I'll break him like a dry twig. He's a how do you say, an appetizer. Miller didn't smile. He didn't care about honor. He didn't care about martial arts. All he cared about was that the Milton Cole Show had lost 2 points in the ratings last week. He needed a spectacle. He needed a train wreck. He needed violence disguised as entertainment. Don't kill him, Miller whispered, dropping his cigarette and crushing it under his heel. Not until the second commercial break, anyway. Back in Bruce's room, the atmosphere changed. Bruce closed his book. He couldn't hear the conversation in the hallway, but he could sense the intent. The mood was bad. It was hostile. Ted, his manager, rushed in, his face pale. They've changed the running order, Bruce. You're on in 10 minutes. And listen, Bruce, I just saw the other guy. Bruce stood up. He moved with deceptive laziness, like a cat stretching in the sun. And he's huge, Bruce. I mean, he's not just tall. He's a giant. Maybe we should talk to the producers, set some ground rules. No contact. Bruce adjusted the cuffs of his costume. He was wearing a traditional Chinese tunic, simple and elegant. He looked at Ted, and for the first time that day, a small, mischievous smile touched his lips. Ted, Bruce said softly, the size of the target just makes it easier to hit. This isn't a joke, Ted hissed. I heard them talking. They want him to rough you up. They want to humiliate you. It's a trap. Bruce walked over to the mirror. He looked at his reflection. He didn't see a victim. He saw water. Water that could flow or water that could crash. He thought back to the endless hours spent in the garage. The sweat, the bloody knuckles, the lonely quest for perfection that no one else could see. He thought back to the traditional masters in Chinatown who called him a traitor because he taught non-Chinese students. He thought back to the Hollywood executives who thought he was too Asian for a leading role. All his life, people had tried to put him in a box. Tonight they were going to try to put him in a coffin. Let them try. Bruce whispered to the glass. Suddenly, a stagehand wearing headphones poked his head through the door. Lee, you're up. Come on, let's go. As Bruce walked down the narrow corridor leading to the stage, the noise from the studio grew louder. The audience's applause echoed like a distant roar, like the ocean during a storm. He turned the corner, and there, blocking the way, stood Boris. This was the first time they had come face to face. The difference in size was comical. Boris towered over him like a wall of oiled flesh and arrogance. The wrestler looked down at him with a contemptuous sneer. He took a deep breath, inflating his imposing chest as if he wanted to suck all the oxygen out of the hallway. "So," Boris growled, leaning toward Bruce, his face inches from his. "You're the kung fu master. You look like a little boy lost in a supermarket." Bruce didn't blink. He didn't lift his head. He kept his gaze fixed, staring directly at Boris's throat. His heart didn't race. His breathing didn't quicken. In his mind, he was already dissecting the anatomy of the giant standing before him. Heavy center of gravity. Poor balance. Overconfident. Open. "Excuse me," Bruce said in a polite, calm, and terribly confident voice. "I believe we are expected on stage." Boris blinked. He expected fear. He expected the little man to back away. But Bruce hadn't moved an inch. "You're going to learn respect tonight, little man," Boris growled, stepping aside just enough to let Bruce pass. Bruce walked past him without turning around. When he reached the curtain, he stopped. He closed his eyes for a second. He visualized a stream flowing around a rock. He let go of his anger. He let go of his fear. He let go of his need to win. He became nothing. And now, Milton Cole's voice boomed over the studio speakers, dripping with feigned enthusiasm. "Please welcome the man who claims to have the fastest hand in the world, Bruce Lee." The band struck up a catchy oriental tune. The on-air light turned blood red. The curtain opened. Bruce stepped into the blinding light. The audience applauded politely, unaware that they were about to witness an execution. But the question was, who would be the executioner? The studio lights were blinding. For the 15 million viewers watching in black and white, the setting was glamorous. A glittering urban backdrop, a plush sofa, and Milton Cole's refined desk. But to Bruce, it felt more like an arena. The air was dry and recycled, with a metallic taste of ozone and adrenaline. Bruce walked to the center of the stage, moving with that distinctive grace that made him appear to float a few inches above the floor. He bowed slightly to the audience, then to Milton Cole. Milton sat behind his desk, a tight smile on his face. He was a professional, but his eyes darted nervously to the wings of the stage where the producers stood. He knew what was about to happen. He was part of the trap. "Welcome, Bruce," Milton said, gesturing to the empty space in the center of the stage. "We've heard a lot about your philosophy, the art of fighting without fighting. Is that right?" Bruce smiled. It was a sincere, disarming smile. "That's one aspect of it. Yes, it's about efficiency, honesty, simplicity." Milton repeated with a hint of mockery in his voice. "Well, simplicity is fine, but our audience likes action. They want to see if it really works." Milton pressed a button on his desk. A sudden, dramatic drum roll echoed through the studio. "Ladies and gentlemen, we thought we'd put Bruce's theories to the test. We've invited a special guest to help us. A man who doesn't believe in philosophy. He believes in pain. Please welcome the Iron Bear, Boris Petroff." The audience erupted. This was why they had come. The curtain opened again, and Boris burst onto the stage. The floor literally vibrated under his footsteps. He wore a wrestling singlet that left nothing to the imagination, revealing legs as thick as tree trunks and arms as big as fire hydrants. He roared at the crowd, tearing a phone book in half with one violent gesture, throwing the confetti of pages into the air. It was theatrical. It was loud. It was everything Bruce despised. Boris walked to the center of the stage and stood next to Bruce. The visual contrast was striking. It was like a grizzly bear next to a panther. The audience laughed, a nervous, excited laugh. They were already writing the ending in their heads. The big man crushes the little man. Milton leaned forward. "No, Boris says that martial arts are..." "What was the word you used, Boris?" "Ballot!" Boris boomed into the microphone, his voice echoing around the room. "It's dancing in pajamas! It's for girls!" The audience gasped, then chuckled. Bruce remained perfectly still. His hands hung limply at his sides. He looked neither at the audience nor at Milton. His eyes were fixed on Boris's chest, watching the movement of his breath. "Master, Petroff is entitled to his opinion," Bruce said in a calm voice, cutting through the laughter like a razor blade. "But boards don't fight back. Neither do phone books." Boris's face turned red. He wasn't used to being talked back to. He was used to fear. He stepped closer, invading Bruce's personal space. The smell of cheap cologne and aggression emanated from him. "You talk a lot," Boris growled, forgetting the microphone, his voice dropping to a threatening rumble that the boom mic struggled to pick up. "But can you move me? Can you stop me?" The script, the one Bruce had agreed to, called for a demonstration. Bruce was supposed to show off a few blocks. Boris was supposed to pretend to be impressed. They would shake hands. End of segment. But Boris had a different script. Without signal, without warning, Boris lunged. It wasn't a punch, it was a grab. Boris reached out his massive, fleshy hand and grabbed Bruce by the lapel of his jacket. The fabric stretched. The audience screamed. This wasn't part of the rehearsal. "Let's see if you can fly, little bird," Boris shouted. He lifted Bruce up completely, lifting Bruce off the ground. Bruce swung in the air, suspended by the giant's grip. The audience fell silent. Milton Cole stood up, his chair scraping loudly across the floor. In the control room, the director froze. What is he doing? "This isn't the script! Keep filming!" shouted the producer. "This is gold! Look at the ratings!" On screen, it looked like a massacre. Bruce Lee, the master, the philosopher, seemed helpless, a child in the hands of a monster. Boris smiled, revealing his yellow, uneven teeth. He raised his other fist, a fist the size of a hammer, ready to bring it down on Bruce's exposed ribs. That moment lasted an eternity. 1 second, 2 seconds, 3 seconds. Bruce hung there. He didn't struggle. He didn't gesticulate. His face was a mask of terrifying serenity. He wasn't trapped. He was waiting. He was waiting for the perfect moment when Boris's commitment to his punch would outweigh his ability to defend himself. He was waiting for the giant to overextend himself, and then the 4th second passed. Bruce's eyes changed expression. The serenity disappeared, replaced by a focused, predatory intensity that chilled the blood. He didn't need the ground to generate power. He didn't need leverage. He needed physics. When Boris's fist came at him, Bruce didn't block it. He didn't dodge it. He intercepted it. The laws of physics dictate that in order to generate power, a man needs leverage. He needs the ground to push off from. But Bruce Lee had spent years dismantling the laws of physics and reassembling them in his own image. Suspended in mid-air, hanging by his collar, Bruce didn't need the ground. He used Boris's arm, the very limb that held him hostage, as a fulcrum. In a split second, before Boris's massive fist could touch him, Bruce curled up. His abdominal muscles, honed by thousands of hours of torture, contracted violently. He thrust his hips forward in mid-air, generating a kinetic wave that traveled up his spine and exploded out of his right hand. It wasn't a punch, it was a whip. Bruce's back fist struck faster than the shutter speed of television cameras. It hit Boris squarely in the nose. Crack. The sound was sickening. It wasn't the dull thud of a stage punch, it was the sharp, high-pitched crack of breaking bone. It echoed through the studio microphones, amplified into millions of living rooms across America. Boris's head snapped back as if he had been shot. The pain was immediate and blinding. He instantly let go of Bruce's collar. His massive hand opened, his nerves paralyzed by the shock. Bruce fell, but he didn't fall. He didn't stumble. He didn't run away. When his feet touched the polished floor of the stage, he didn't land like a man but like a cat. Silently. Anchored. Balanced. By the time Boris raised his hands to his ruined face, Bruce had already taken his fighting stance, the on-guard position, right foot forward, heel raised, hands in the air, body in constant motion in a rhythmic and hypnotic sway. The audience was silent. No one was breathing. Milton Cole gripped the edge of his desk so tightly that his knuckles were white. This wasn't the script. This wasn't the rehearsed East meets West sketch. This was real, raw, unfiltered violence. Boris shook his head, blood dripping from his nose, staining his teeth. The shock was replaced by a primitive animal rage. He let out a roar that shook the spotlights. He no longer cared about the cameras. He no longer cared about the show. He wanted to kill the little man standing in front of him. "I'm going to break you," Boris yelled, spitting blood. He charged, 350 pounds of momentum. A freight train without brakes. He lowered his shoulder, aiming to tackle Bruce and propel him through the back wall of the set. In the control room, the director shouted into his headset, "Cut to commercial! Cut to commercial!" But the producer, fascinated by the horror and beauty of the scene, grabbed the director's wrist. "No! Keep rolling!" Look at the screens. On stage, Bruce didn't run. He didn't back away. As the giant closed in, Bruce did the one thing no one expected. He stepped forward. He entered the danger zone. Bruce feinted downward, causing Boris to lower his guard for a split second. Then Bruce exploded upward. A high kick, perfectly vertical, defying gravity, shot up. His foot hit the underside of Boris's chin. Thwack! The giant's head snapped back again. His momentum was stopped dead in its tracks. He staggered. His eyes rolled back. He swayed like a felled tree. But Bruce wasn't done. He wasn't showing off his techniques. He was ending the fight. He landed after his kick and immediately followed up with a flurry of punches. the chain-punching characteristic of Wing Chun, modified by the mechanics of Jeet Kune Do. Pop! 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 5 punches in less than a second, each aimed at the solar plexus, each expelling the air from Boris's lungs, collapsing his structure, dismantling his will. Boris fell. He didn't collapse. He crashed. He hit the ground with the weight of a fallen statue, shaking the cameras. He lay there gasping, clutching his chest, completely neutralized. Bruce stood over him. He wasn't gasping. He wasn't sweating. He looked down at the defeated giant, his face impassive. He slowly lowered his hands, adjusted his cufflinks, smoothed the front of his suit jacket. He looked up directly at camera 2. His eyes burned with an intensity that transcended the black and white signal. It was a look that said, "I am not a joke. I am not a stereotype. I am the truth." For a moment, Bruce Lee held the gaze of 15 million Americans. Then the producer in the booth finally snapped out of his trance. The reality of the trial, the violence, the blood on live television hit him all at once. He shouted, pounding his fist on the console, "Stop right now." The screen went black. Static noise filled American living rooms. Then a sudden and jarring cut to a commercial for laundry detergent. A smiling housewife holding a box of powdered detergent, unaware that she had just interrupted the most electrifying moment in television history. But in the studio, the broadcast had been cut, but reality continued to unfold. And what happened when the red light went out was even more revealing than the fight itself. The on-air sign flashed and then went out. The studio was plunged into an eerie, heavy silence, broken only by the wheezing gasps of Boris Petroff, who was still writhing in pain on the floor, his chest tight. The audience didn't move. They didn't applaud. They were in shock. They looked at Bruce Lee not as an entertainer, but as something dangerous, something they didn't yet know how to name. Milton Cole, pale and trembling, finally emerged from behind his desk. He looked at the giant on the floor, then at Bruce. "My God," Milton whispered in a trembling voice. Is he alive?" Bruce turned slowly. The predatory fire in his eyes was gone, instantly replaced by the calm politeness of a scholar. He approached Boris, knelt down, and placed a hand on the wrestler's massive shoulder. "Breathe deeply," Bruce said softly, almost kindly. "Don't fight the pain. Let it wash over you." It was a surreal image, the victor comforting the vanquished. The man who had just delivered a brutal lesson in violence was now offering compassion. Boris looked up, his eyes filled with tears and confusion. He tried to speak, but only a groan came out of his mouth. His nose was already swollen, turning a dark, menacing purple. "You," Boris gasped. "You hit like a truck." Bruce smiled, a small, sad smile. "I didn't hit you, Boris. You hit yourself. I just showed you the mirror." Suddenly, the spell was broken. The studio doors burst open. Executives in suits, security guards, and doctors flooded the set. It was chaos. Men were shouting and pointing fingers. "Get him out of here," yelled an executive, pointing at Bruce. "He assaulted a guest! He ruined the show!" Ted, Bruce's manager, ran onto the set, looking like he was about to have a heart attack. Bruce, what have you done? We're screwed. They're going to sue us until we're ruined." Bruce stood up. He looked at the frantic executives, the panicked producers, the chaos swirling around him. He seemed completely detached from it all. He was an island of calm in a sea of noise. "I did what I was paid to do," Bruce said calmly to Ted. "I demonstrated the truth." "The truth," Ted yelled. "You broke his nose on national television." "You think that's going to get you students? You think that's going to get you a studio? You're blacklisted, Bruce. You're finished." Bruce looked at Ted. He saw the fear in his manager's eyes, and in that moment, he understood something profound. He realized he didn't care. For years, he had tried to adapt his art to their world. He had tried to package infinity in a format that could be sold between soap commercials. He had tried to satisfy people who only wanted to be entertained, not enlightened. But tonight, the world had collapsed. "Let's go, Ted," Bruce said, turning his back on the chaos. Go where?" Ted stammered. "We have to apologize. We have to fix this." Bruce stopped. He looked at Boris, who was being helped onto a stretcher. The giant met Bruce's gaze. There was no anger left in Boris's face, only respect. Boris nodded, a small, pained gesture of acknowledgement, one warrior recognizing another. Bruce returned his nod. Then he headed for the exit, his footsteps echoing on the hard floor. "We won't apologize for anything," Bruce said, his voice resonating with a new authority. "And we won't fix anything, because nothing is broken." They exited through the back door of the studio into the cool night air of the Burbank lot. It was raining lightly. The sidewalk glistened under the streetlights. Ted was still hyperventilating. "I don't understand, Bruce. Why? Why did you have to be so harsh?" Bruce stopped under a streetlight. The rain fogged up his suit. He looked up at the sky, at the vast, dark void above the city lights. "Because Ted," Bruce said softly, "if I had played their game, I would have lost myself. Tonight they saw the real me. Maybe they hated it. Maybe they feared it. But they saw me. Me." He turned to his manager. "I don't want 2,000 students who want to learn tricks. I want 2 students who want to learn the truth." Ted looked at him, speechless. He realized he was no longer looking at a client. He was looking at a master. At that moment, a young man, barely 20 years old, ran out of the studio. He was wearing headphones around his neck, and in turn, he was out of breath. "Mr. Lee! Mr. Lee!" the young man shouted. Ted stepped in front of Bruce. "No comment. Let's go." But the young man ignored Ted. He stopped in front of Bruce, his eyes wide, shining with an intensity that mirrored Bruce's. "I saw it," the young man said, panting. "I was in the booth. I saw what you did. The way you moved. The way you flowed." Bruce looked at the young man. He saw the spark. "I don't want an autograph," stammered the young man. "I just want to know. Can you teach me? Not the fighting. The other thing. The way you stood there as if the storm couldn't touch you." Bruce smiled. This time it wasn't for show. It was sincere. "The storm is always there," said Bruce. "The secret isn't to stop the storm. The secret is to become the rain." He reached into his pocket and pulled out a small, crumpled business card. He handed it to the young man. "Come to the garage on Saturday at 6 a.m. Don't be late." As the young man stared at the card as if it were a golden ticket, Bruce turned and walked away into the night. The producers erased the tape. They threatened to sue. They tried to bury the story, but they couldn't bury the legend. Because 15 million people had seen it. And most importantly, Bruce Lee had seen himself. He didn't know it yet, but that night marked the death of Bruce Lee the actor and the birth of Bruce Lee the Dragon. The tape of the show was never found. NBC officially stated that a magnetization error had erased the segment. The Milton Cole Show continued for 5 more years, unsurprisingly without risk and without interest. But in the underground world of martial arts, the story of November 14th became legendary. Bruce Lee didn't get the studio that night. He didn't get easy fame or recognition from the Hollywood elite. In fact, he was labeled difficult, dangerous, and uncontrollable. And that was exactly what he needed. If Bruce had followed the script that night, if he had let Boris rough him up, if he had smiled and played the role of the mystical sidekick, he might have become rich. He might have been a successful stunt coordinator or a character actor in B-movies. But he would not have become the dragon. By refusing to compromise his art for applause, Bruce Lee burned his bridges with mediocrity. He forced himself to forge a new path, a path that led him back to Hong Kong, to a film culture hungry for the very intensity that Hollywood feared. The lost broadcast was not a tragedy. It was a liberation. It was the moment Bruce Lee realized he didn't need the system. It was the system that needed him. November 14, 1967. 4 seconds that changed television history. 4 seconds that ended one career and launched a legend. 4 seconds when 15 million Americans learned that some truths are too powerful for prime time. Boris, the Iron Bear, Petroff never wrestled professionally again. The injury to his nose required multiple surgeries, but the damage to his confidence was permanent. He returned to the Soviet Union 6 months later, where he became a coach for young wrestlers, teaching them not just strength and technique, but respect for their opponents. Milton Cole continued hosting his show for 5 more years, but he never forgot that November night. In later interviews, he would only say, "Some guests changed the show. That guest changed television." And somewhere in a garage in Los Angeles, Bruce Lee continued to teach, not to the masses who wanted entertainment, but to the few who wanted truth. The dragon was learning to fly. The feed had been cut. The tape had been erased. But the legend had just begun. 4 seconds. 15 million witnesses. One moment that proves some things are too real for television. And sometimes, that's exactly when they become immortal.